Michael Zagansky. You ready to go, buddy?
You know it.
All right.
So this is a question about fear in kids. So with adults, we can intellectually discuss our fears and recognize the importance of confronting them. But what about with kids? Is there a kid-friendly way to help them think about their fears and take action to confront them without being counterproductive?
There is. One thing that you don't do is deny their fear. Daddy, there's a monster in my closet. And it doesn't help to say, nah, there's no monster in your closet, and then walk out of the room. That's not helpful. They're still terrified, and you just left them with a monster in the closet. So you don't deny their fears. But a thing that you can do then is say, well, I'll look. Here, come with me. You can pick them up if they're small enough to pick up, and you can hold them, and you can walk them over to the closet and turn on the light and move all the clothes around and peek here and there and see that there is no monster in the closet. So things like that will help over time. And you can tell them, well, there really never was a monster in the closet. You just thought there might have been. And because you're small, the idea that frightened you, but it's your idea. So you're frightening yourself. So you can mention things like that. They won't understand it, but eventually all that will sink in. So the point is you always treat them gently. You never tell them that they're wrong. You just try to show them another reality that isn't so scary. And you can tell them, I built that. I made that closet. No, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Or, that's a closet in my house. And monsters can't get into my house. So you'll never see a monster in this house. Because if you tell them, oh, there are no monsters, they can't believe that. That's just Dad trying to soothe them. But if you say that you have a special house that's monster-free, they might believe some of that. They may take some of that on and say, oh, yeah, my dad's super powerful. He put a hex on all the monsters and they can't get in the house now. So you can make up some things like that will make them feel better, that you are taking care of them and you are protecting them because that's your role. You're their father, you protect them. So you can use that kind of a story with them. Eventually they'll realize that you just made all that up, but by then they'll be over it and it's fine, and they'll be happy that you did. They won't say, oh, Dad, you lied to me. You didn't have a hex on the monsters. They'll be very glad that you made them feel better and safer by telling them something that at their age they could comprehend. So when they're very young, you have to interact with them at their level. They live in a magic space where monsters and all kinds of things might exist. They don't know that, it's something that they've created out of their own fear. Part of that fear is just by being small. You're small, you don't control hardly anything in your world. Everything just happens whether you want it to or not. So you're in this world that just does whatever it does. And that's frightening to a small child. They don't have any control over their world. Anything that happens to them, and they're defenseless pretty much. So, you can make them feel better by telling them things about how safe you've made it, and that they won't be hurt. But if they get scared, they should just holler and you'll come. So they always know that if they actually see the monster, they can holler and Dad will be in the room in a few seconds. That'll make them feel safe, that you're not saying, there's no monsters. Suck it up, Cupcake. That's not helpful. So maybe that'll at least give you some ideas and direction.
Yeah. So what if they're, maybe just as like a more specific example, what if they're a bit older, not quite in that age anymore of monsters and magic, but not, mature enough, maybe not even a teenager yet, like 10 or 12 years old. Let's say they really like swimming in the ocean or whatever, but they've suddenly developed a fear of sharks and they won't go into the water anymore. But they like swimming, but they won't, and and there is, some reasonable, logical reason for being, cautious about sharks, but yeah, I don't know, just an example.
Yeah, the best way to deal with that is to talk to them very logically about it in terms of probability. Yes, there are sharks that swim in swim in the ocean, and some of them are very big. And yes, sometimes sharks and people, don't mix. Sharks bite people sometimes, but there are this many people, and the probability of you getting a shark bite if you go play in the ocean and stay in the first 20 feet of that ocean is very small. You can do an estimate of all the people that play in the ocean during a year, and the time they spend in it, and then how many of those people get bitten by sharks. You can convince them that it's one in probably 100 million probability that they'll be bitten by a shark. It happens, but it's kind of a random thing. But when it's more likely, we tend to know that it's more likely. The airplanes that fly out over the coast, they'll tell you that a bunch of sharks are, moving this way. And then people are told, don't go to the beach for the next 2 weeks. And, that if there was a problem, it would probably be noted that there's a problem. If it's just a one-off random event that some renegade shark happens to be in your neighborhood, well, that's probably one in, like I say, 1 in 5 million or something, 1 in 100 million. And then they can feel safer. And you can say it's just like a lot of other things we do, that life has risks in it. It's a good thing for them to understand if they're 10, 11 years old, even 8 or 9 years old. Life is risky. Every time we get in a car, there's a possibility of an accident. Now if you think that's going to make them terrified of getting in a car, don't go there. But if you think that's going to work for them, then you can go there. You get in cars. We walk down the street. Just walking down the street is risky. Something could happen, but the risks are small. They're so small that we go walk down the street anyway, because it's 1 in 100 million that anything is going to happen to us walking down the street. This is a nice neighborhood. Some streets aren't so nice. And if you walk down some streets, you can almost guarantee something not nice would happen to you. Okay, so because of where we live, because of the circumstances we're in, yes, there are those things out there, and you should be aware. You should be mindful of things that don't look right or that don't seem to add up. But in general, don't worry about it. It's such a low risk that it's not worth worrying about. If you worry about everything that's 1 in 100 million of happening to you, you would be paralyzed. You wouldn't be able to, you'd crawl under your bed and never be able to come out. So if your children are old enough that you can have a logical conversation with them, then I would try to encourage them with things that you think they can handle positively. If you think they're just going to crawl under their bed and not want to come out, well, that would not be a good approach. You have to judge what your kids are ready for. But if they understand that life has risks in it, and it'll always have risks in it, there is no place you can live, no place you can go that there are no risks. There's always going to be risks in life, but you have to deal wisely with those risks. When the risks get to be just 1 in 100 or 1 in 300, you need to start paying attention. But anything much more than that, you maybe should give it some attention, but you don't have to worry too much about it. 1 in 10, you better start worrying. If you're get to that kind of probabilities. So let them think about that, and it'll give them it'll give them a lot of security if they understand it. They'll realize that every little thing that could happen out there in the world, like all the violence they see on TV. If you allow your kids to see TV and they see a lot of violence, they can realize that yes, that does happen some places, but it's not likely it's going to happen to them. So that the TV doesn't depress them or frighten them. So does that help, Michael?
Yeah, I think so. I guess that's dependent on them having that kind of logical capacity, which, yeah,
Yes. If
I
they
don't know.
don't, and they're let's say 10, 8, you can just tell them that that's your job. That's what you're there for, is to make sure things don't happen to them, and that you're going to take care of them. And if there's something that's dangerous, you'll know about it, and you will protect them and won't let them do it. So if there's sharks have been seen there, somebody got bit there last week, well, we won't go there. We'll go someplace where nobody's been bitten by a shark for 50 years. That's where we'll go. And that's your job to take care of them and make sure they're safe. And so far, you've been doing a pretty good job because none of them have been hurt seriously. So, just let them see that don't worry about it. I've got your back. That's probably what you tell your little girls. You probably tell your little boys more about the probability because that's just kind of the difference between boys and girls.
Thank you.
I thought that was a funny answer because that's exactly what I do. I tell the kids, nope, no entities can come in this house. Don't worry about it. We put a magic spell on it. And even when they want, I think there's this thing in Christmas, elf on a shelf, right? It's one of Santa's elves, and it watches you. And I say, no, no elves in this house, not in
Yeah.
this one.
Yeah, well, like Michael says, that's good if they're 3 years old. If they're 12, you have to have a different approach altogether. Yeah.
Uh, and I don't want to blow up her spot here, but Sylvia just had a great, interesting comment. She said when she was young and you were in her life, the fact that you weren't afraid and you were one of the only adults in her life that were not afraid gave her such I don't know, confidence or comfortable. Would you mind sharing that, Sylvia, with us?
Yeah, you did a pretty good job though. Yeah. I think it was less intellectual and more just direct, I think particularly as children, they're very sensitive and they can feel when people around them are fearful or angry with each other, or they can feel that. And so, when Tom would come visit me in the hospital, I could feel that he wasn't freaked out like everybody else. And that gave me a sense that, okay, this isn't that scary. But when everybody else that was so scared, that is really scary as a child, when you can feel it, particularly when they're pretending like, hi, but you can sense their feel. No, that is really, I think that I'll take that away as the scariest part of when it's you, then it's so bad they can't even tell you how bad it is. They're hiding it. And
Yeah.
that's terrifying. So yeah, so I would say if we can release our fears, then that can indirectly help them, and they may be conscious of it or it may be subconscious. But I don't know, Tom, you probably have something really good to add to that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Children are very intuitive. They're naturally intuitive. They can read their, people very accurately, particularly their parents, because they've been reading their parents for a lifetime. That's what they do. And they're very good at it. So if you're terrified, then you need to get over it because you're not going to hide it. You need to get over it. And you're being terrified is the worst possible thing could happen because you're the people that keep them safe. And you're terrified, so that means it has to be horrible, it has to be really bad if if you can't control it because you're the parents and you control everything. And if you can't keep them safe, well, what will? So yes, that's important. And it's important if you're just talking to people that you're trying to help. The people that you go talk to and you want to give them some advice or they ask you for advice, you know, they can read your feelings and your emotions. and it's better not to try to hide anything. You think that nobody notices. Oh, I'll put on a happy face when I'm really sad, and nobody will notice. That's not true. The people who really know you and care about you will notice absolutely that, you know, you're not being real. So it's always good to just be who you are. But I was happy to be there for Sylvia, but I had complete confidence she was going to do all right. I knew that. I already had, looked that probable future up. She was going to be fine. And as it turns out, that wasn't the only thing that almost killed her. She had like three episodes in a hospital that all were meant to do her in, and she got by all three of them. So it was yeah, I was confident that she'd be just fine.
All right, well, let's move on back over to Armin. You got your charger, buddy?
Yes, I
All
have.
right.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. My question. Hi, Tom. My question is about work and family. So, work has been very important for me and my career for a very long time. So, I've in retrospect, I've kind of been nudged to situations, I think. It's highly probable. So I think I should do stuff that are related to workspace. But a couple of years ago, when I met my lovely wife, we wanted to get children, but I was kind of like confused. Can I do this in the line of work that I want to do and have a family and child also? So I kind of got in an altered state when I got the feelings and notions of that it's going to be fine. I can do both. And I did both, but I would choose another work to get more stability for my family. But lately, I've been nudged back to where my heart is in the other line of work. And I think it's the right thing to do to go back to theater and acting and storytelling. So I'm going to do that with confidence, but still, we have another child coming soon to our life in December, and my wife and I probably want uh, another child also. My wife want a big family, and so I'm just wondering, and I thought about you because I think you have a big family and you been nudged your whole life to do stuff, I guess. So how have you balanced that? And do you have any advice regarding this area?
Well, you can succeed in almost anything, and it depends on your family. You don't have to be wealthy to be happy. A family that has a lot of love and a lot of caring can be happy with very, very little. So it's not like, well, my daughters all have to have, the latest, designer jeans or they'll be unhappy. If you raise your children in a loving family, they won't have to have designer jeans because they get their self-respect from the family, not from their peers. You see, it just won't be a problem. So, I'd say if you're being pulled to a particular career path and you think that's the right thing for you, then I'd say do it. See where it takes you. I mean, who knows? You may get into that career path and you may change your mind, or that path may pop you out to something different that changes your life. You can't plan your whole life when you're 20 something or 30 something or even 40 something years old. You try to plan all the rest of your life And you can't do that. You can't see that far ahead. You don't know of all the opportunities and the chances and the pits that you might fall into. You just don't know all that stuff. So what you do is exactly what you did. You meditate on it. You get a sense that it's a good thing to do. You have your family, but you treat your family well. They're important. They're more important than your job. And generally, they have to be more important than your job. If your job is more important than your family is going to be dysfunctional. The family has to be more important than your job. So you raise your children and you give them lots of love, and they will turn out to be really good people. And it won't matter if they're poor, they'll deal with it, and it won't bother them a bit. They won't suffer from it. It'll be good. They'll learn the lessons of being frugal. They'll learn how to get by, and they will see their peers who flaunt their stuff as being shallow, which indeed is true. It is shallow. So it'll help them. They can use that to help them grow up. So you can grow up well in almost any situation. I wouldn't worry about that. Now, you do have to have some resources, obviously. Some resources are required to pay rent, put gas in a car and do other things. So you have to have a minimum. But even if that minimum goes away for a few months or so on, you can generally get by. There's enough charitable sources out there that if there's a lot of love in the family, you can get by. But you should have a plan that everything will work fine, that you can handle it, and then be very positive about it. Because if you go into it fearful, what if this doesn't work? What if we all starve to death? You go into it with that kind of fear, you will create that sort of a situation as an outcome. So go into it and say, I'm going to do this. It's going to be great. I'm going to succeed. I'm going to do this. Well, what do I need to succeed? Well, I need to be seen. I need to get parts. I need to know people who know people. I need to start moving in those circles. I can't just sit at home with my family and expect somebody to call me up and give me a wonderful job. That doesn't work that way. I'm going to have to get out there and mix with the people who are in the business and make friends with the people who offer jobs. And so be smart about what you're doing and how you're going to do it and how long it's going to take you to develop those new relationships and those new friends. That won't be in a week. That's going to take some time. So if you look at the whole thing and figure it can work, then go for it. Do it. That's your passion. You can always change your mind later if you need to.
Yeah, I have the luxury having two educations in the background, so I can do both worlds. But it's the thing, like, what I wonder most about was like kind of having a big family. That's wonderful. I will love that, but also it demands more of me. So I refuse to be the dad in that song you mentioned. That's not in my nature. So that's why I'm wondering about this a lot, because having a third or fourth child, it's different than having two only. So
I've had 4. I got 2 boys and 2 girls. I could have had 2 more boys and 2 more girls, and it still would have worked out just fine. It's not, after, first wife had a boy, then second wife had 2 girls and a boy. So that's how that turned out. But number of kids going from 2 to 4 is not that big a deal. It's good, and in my case, my second set of the second 3 didn't even start until I was 40. The first one, I had that baby when I was still in my 20s. middle 20s. But the last ones I had, I was over 40. I was 42, 43 when I had those children. Doesn't really make any difference. It's different, you know. They're your children, and you love them, and you care for them, and it all just works out fine. It's there's no problem, you know. I wouldn't think that problems start until you get more like, you know, if you get like 10, now you're in another whole class, you know. You got 10 kids, you know, that's a whole different ball game, you know. But you know, 2, 3, 4, that's not that big a deal. Even 5, you know, but it's it'll work out all right. Don't worry about the details too much.
Okay, thank you so much, Tom.
Simon, you're up next for your question. Go ahead.
Okay, good evening. I want to try it. Okay. Hello, Tom. My question is a bit personal. Okay, when you realized during your work with Bob Monroe that consciousness is immortal and that we as consciousness receive data streams to make better decisions in order to become love, how did you deal with it emotionally, including the way the people around you treat you? Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Well, in my case, it was kind of a long evolution because first I learned to do paranormal things. Okay, and I learned that with Bob Monroe. So I learned to go out of body, to heal, to remote view, and all the paranormal things. And I got pretty good at all of that. And then I wanted to understand, how did they work? How do the paranormal things work? I really wasn't that interested in philosophy yet. You know, I just wanted to know, what are the mechanics? I'm a physicist, a young physicist, and I see stuff in a world that is non-physical and consciousness, and I want to know, how does it work? Why does it work that way? What else can I do with it? What can I do with it? You know, where are the limits? What's the rules that say what you can do? So I was looking for the non-physical physics that explained all these things to me. And as I developed that and understood more of what the variables were and what did what to what, it became more self-evident to me that I was changing. I wasn't just a physicist who was trying to figure things out. I was changing who I was. I listened more and talked less. I was, you know, more interested in, you know, the roots of things, you know, philosophy, you know, where did all this start? You know, how did it get here? How did we get here? So I started having the big questions come in. Say, well, if I understand this consciousness right, then this consciousness thing is fundamental. I knew that. The way I knew that was I could do things in consciousness that would affect things here, would change things here. I'd done that hundreds of times, so I knew that arrow of causality was from consciousness down to the physical. Consciousness, could change the physical world, but I, in the physical world, couldn't change consciousness. There wasn't any physical thing I could do that would then go back and modify what consciousness was. Now, I could change the constraints that consciousness had to work with, but that's not the same as forcing consciousness to be some way because of what I did in the physical, you know, that's different. So because of that, I knew the arrow of causality went from consciousness to the physical world. Consciousness was fundamental, physical world wasn't. I didn't know why. I didn't have a virtual reality theory at the time. I just knew that that's the way it was. And when you get to that point, that opens up a whole lot of philosophy and theology and other kinds of things for you when you get to understand that consciousness is fundamental, and that's where we come from, that the physical world is dependent on consciousness. Now, a lot of philosophy, theology, other things start to bubble up out of that understanding. So then my big picture started to come together slowly as I understood what was going on. And when I finally got to the viewpoint that, oh,
Yes.
it's a virtual
Oh.
reality. That's what it is. It's just about information. You
Mm.
know, when I got that, that was a, I didn't have much of an emotional reaction other than that, oh, that's something that finally makes sense. It was like having a jigsaw puzzle and you only have 3 pieces left that you can't put in and you just don't know how to make the puzzle, look whole. I've got this nice logical stream of things, but here, I got a hole, and a hole someplace, and I just don't seem to be able to plug those holes with anything logical. So you kind of get stuck. And then when I got to it's just information, well, all those pieces just fell in, holes all got filled, everything worked, and I was very pleased that that information about it being a virtual reality and everything was information. First, I got everything was information. And then it took me just a little while to go from there to virtual reality. And then even more things fell into place. So for me, it was like a learning thing. I didn't have my emotional reaction to all that was, yes, finally, I got some concept that actually made it all fit. So that's how I approached that. So for me, it was a logical puzzle that I had to put together. I had all these facts that I'd learned from the non-physical, from being able to do research in the non-physical. I had all these facts as a physicist about how the physical world worked, and I needed to be able to have all of that be consistent with each other. Both set of facts had to be explained by one understanding. And when it finally came to me, I was very happy that something had, I had finally come across the one thing and only thing that could logically bridge those gaps. And then I tried to think, is there anything else that would bridge that gap? Is there some other way of looking at it? Is this the only path possible, or is there other paths that you could get to the same place? And I looked for some other way around and found nothing. This was it. This seemed to be the only logical possibility for how things worked. So that's how my model, developed. So my emotions were all joyful at having found the solution. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, Simon, but that's kind of how it came together.
Okay, yeah, it's very emotional to accept consciousness is immortal and this is a body and we are here to learn. I'm going with your model and yeah, I'm really interested at the moment what come in your consciousness to accept, hey, Bob, this is our data streams. We are consciousness. We are immortal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
we are here to learn.
Yeah, it just didn't come up with it that easily. There's lots and lots of facts out there
And your
that you can
family.
find that people have found. Like there are there are children who are 5 years old who swear they were an airplane pilot, in World War I or something, and they give the name of the pilot and where they were shot down and the kind of plane they were in. They give all these details that, when looked up, actually there was a pilot in that war that had that plane and that serial number and it's so you have these kinds of things, and there's a couple of people in universities who research them and spend their lives searching for these kinds of facts. And they research the credibility of the fact and so on. And so they're facts. It's not just some story somebody made up. It's factual material. There's people who are in graduate school working on on a mathematics master's and doctorate degrees who don't have any brains. When you look inside their head, there's only a 1/4 inch of brain tissue around the inside of their skull. When they were born, they had encephalitis, which means their head was full of water. Their brain never developed. It only developed this quarter inch, about a centimeter worth of brain tissue spread around the inside of their skull, and that's it. They don't have the part that does locomotion. They don't have the part that does balance. They don't have the part that does speech. They don't have the part that does vision. They don't have the part that does the thinking. Yet they're fully functional people. They're married. They have 3 kids. They're working on their PhD. How did that happen? You know, so you look at all of these things that are well documented by serious professional people, and you realize there's got to be an explanation for how all of this works. And you have to just figure out, you know, that was the thing. I had all these pieces of my puzzle, and I needed just one idea that would make them work. So I'd get little bits and pieces of it, and I'd fill in a piece here, I'd fill in a piece there, but some pieces were still missing. And then the one thing that was common, I was looking at what's common in all of this stuff. What's the common denominator? The physical world, this world, whatever. And it just hit me. It was information. That's what was common. And then I started looking about information and information theory and who said what about information. And when I started looking for that, I found Fredkin and you know, John Archibald Wheeler. And I said, oh, here's some pretty powerful physicists who are real smart, and they think the reality is information. What can I do with that? So then I start, how does that fit in? And, you know, eventually I just made a whole picture, and it fit everything. And then I started with my picture and found out that I could derive quantum physics, and I could derive, you know, YC is a constant, and I could determine all of these unknowns that were around, these mysteries, these paradoxes, just fell right out logically. So then the conclusion is, if you've got a model and it's logic, it doesn't have many assumptions, really just one, that consciousness exists. Because if consciousness exists, then evolution has to exist. You know, you can see that logically. You can build one logic out of the other. So if you have that, and it answers all the questions, and it doesn't create any new paradoxes, then what's the probability that you could do all that and still be fundamentally wrong? Close to zero. So I got the conclusion that in order to get all those answers right, I may not have it all, but I must have a pretty good chunk of it correct, because otherwise it would be impossible to do that. You can't make all those predictions and explain all those things logically if you've got big mistakes in your logic. You get things that aren't true. So eventually I came to the idea that this was not only a model, but it was very close to the model, because it worked well. It didn't have any logical flaws in it. Didn't predict anything that, you know, was not there. So that's how I kind of grew into it slowly. But this process I'm telling you about now took place over 40 years, 45 years, you know, still an ongoing process, you know, if you will. So it's not like one day, you know, I didn't know anything and the next day I got the answer. This was a long, long time out of finding the next little piece and the next little piece and the whole thing growing, and then seeing bigger pictures and seeing other things, other logical possibilities. And that's how it worked. So other people like yourself, if you come to it, you're going to have to do something similar. You're going to have to go through every piece of it. You're going to have to see the logic. You're going to have to think, is there some other way to get here? Is this just one of multiple paths? Or is there another path that you know, works as well? And you work your way through it until you've convinced yourself that, no, this has got to be largely correct, or it couldn't do what it's doing. It couldn't be that successful in answering questions. So anyway, that's the process I took, and it took a long time. It's 50 years well, actually more than 50 years. I'm almost 80 now. So, I started this path when I was in my middle to late 20s. So, I've been at it a long time. So
Okay,
it's
thank
more
you,
like,
Tom.
it's more like 60 years in the process of putting all this together. It didn't just occur to me one day, aha, I've got it. Life is a virtual reality, it didn't work like that.
You know, I tell you, with my Dark Night of the Soul event, and I must be accept to this event with the out-of-body experience. I see my body and all these things with very angry, and the LCS bring me to you, and I understand what happened with me, and I must be accept the informations. And I'm really nervous. 2 years, and today everybody, it's going down under. I must be accept. You tell in an interview, it must be emotional accept. That's the way. And yeah, I ask you, it's a very boom experience,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
fast, not for 40 years.
Right. Yeah.
It's right
For you,
now.
it all gets dumped on you all at once. Yeah. For me, it was a very long path of understanding bits and pieces. But for somebody reading it now, it's often it's boom. Yeah. It suddenly wakes you up, and then it's a path that you may take 2 or 3 years trying to understand, put it together. But remember, I always say, remain skeptical. Remain skeptical. Think about everything. Think about other ways of explaining things. If you don't explore everything, then you won't know that the thing that you found is the truth. You have to explore all the possibilities. So always be skeptical, but always be open-minded. And if you can do those two things, then you'll eventually end up in the right place.
All right, we got maybe time for one more question. Alina, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Tom.
Oh,
Well, yes. My question came from the idea that I'm being consumed by the work on my fears, and I can't get rid of an impression that I'm missing out on the studying more of the physics or promoting the idea of the virtual reality. So the question is, how does the soft-sided MBTI better connects fully with the hard side?
Good question. I don't know that you need to fully connect with the hard side. Of the two sides, certainly the most important and significant side is the soft side. It's more important to understand that love is the answer. It's more important to understand, how we are evolving than it is to understand how to derive quantum physics from these ideas of consciousness, or why C is a constant. For the scientific types, for the left-brainers, all of that science is absolutely necessary. And I go through it in a lot of detail because that is the way we can get into the mainstream, is through science. If MBT gets accepted by science, bingo, you're in the mainstream. So I try to present that solid, rational science side, because I have to convince that physics community that's very hard-headed and very skeptical that this is the better physics. So I have that. But the real meaning, the real significance of MBT isn't that. That's just a strategy for getting into the mainstream so that the soft side can change things and change people and make a big difference. That's what's important. So the science side is important only as a strategy to get the soft side spread around further and be understood more deeply. So having said that, you probably don't have to understand the science of it unless you really want to. Now, if that's something you want to do, then that will be a bit of a struggle because that gets, there's a lot of logical steps there that aren't intuitive, that you have to actually go through the logic to follow them. You have to understand, and that will happen. If you're interested in that, you just read it again. If it doesn't make so much sense, read it again, and eventually it'll all sink in and make sense to you in some general way. But there's nothing you're going to do that'll make quantum physics understandable unless you become a physics major and take quantum physics. And then, if you ask physicists who have taken quantum physics if they understand it, most of them will say no. They don't understand anything about it at all. It's totally not understandable, but they know how to do the mathematics and they know how to calculate right answers, but they have no understanding of how it works at all. That's been the problem for 100 years. They don't understand what they're doing. So anyway, it's the soft side that is really important. It's the side about love and caring and that we have a mission here to fulfill. That the biggest and best contribution we can make to the world is to get ourselves cleared of our fear, become love, grow up yourself. That's the best contribution you can make to making this world a better place. So that puts the ball in everybody's court. Every individual has that, kind of has that task to do. So then it turns it around. I don't have to really understand physics. What I have to do is understand myself. I have to understand my fears and where they're coming from, and I have to be able to get rid of them. I have to love and care about people. And I don't have to act like I love and care about people. I actually have to do it. It's not about acting, not about behavior. It's about what's inside of you. So that's actually a much harder thing to change than learning how to understand physics. If you took 5 years and studied physics, eventually you could learn to understand it. But most people can't learn to become love in 5 years. It's a much harder task to do that, and it's the main one that we should be working on. And the physics stuff is just to get us into the door of the mainstream so that the more important lesson, which is the soft side, can take root and grow and spread so that we can make our culture a more benign and more helpful and supportive culture rather than one that, if you're born into our culture, you're guaranteed to be neurotic on at least, 4 or 5 subjects. It's just because our culture is like that. So if you are part of our culture and you accept the things the culture tells you are real, there'll be a lot of things that are problems for you. People are unhappy and miserable and have trouble with relationships and have trouble connecting with other people because their culture has told them things that aren't true. So it's, that's the harder job. That comparison, that makes physics easy. All it takes is stubborn, repetition, and you eventually get the physics. But getting rid of all those fears that you've been told that's the way you need to be. The culture tells you, here's how you should be, here's how you should respond. These are the truths, and this is what a good person is like. You need to be a good person in the model that our culture presents. If you go along with the model your culture presents, you'll be a confused, unhappy, frustrated person. But people generally don't figure that out for a long time. You have to grow out of your culture and beyond your culture. Like I said, the culture laughs at people hurting each other. They find that to be amusing. That's the kind of culture that you're born into. So it takes a lot of work to get out of something that runs that deep in you. So I'd say physics, that's not a big deal. Go for the thing that's really hard and meaningful, and that's understanding who you are and understanding the things that prevent you from finding joy and happiness and security and value in life. What are the things that keep you from doing that? That's all the fears. So that's a much more important thing to do than to study physics.
Well,
Thank you very
Tom,
much.
thank you, Felina. Tom, this wraps up our session, the 93rd
Oh,
Fireside
look,
Chat.
exactly 4 o'clock, right on the
Right on the
dot.
dot.
How about that for timing? Yeah.
Just perfect. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I hope you'll join us again.
Yes. Yeah, these
for the
were some
next.
really good questions. We have some nuggets here that need to be shared with a larger audience. And thank you for creating them by the questions that you ask. Sometimes
Really
I
good.
go off like I did with Marla and take 30 minutes to answer one question, but I only do that because I think it's a thing that a lot of people need to understand. It's not like this is just Marla's the only one in the world that has this issue. It's like all of us have to deal with this issue. It's ubiquitous. We're all in that same pot. So I take time to talk about it because I think it's important to all the listeners here. So I do that as we go. So I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question, if you had one and I didn't get to it, but we get to do it again. So if that's the case, then come back next time and we will do this all over again.
Those were wonderful questions. We'll see you again.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Guys.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Love you guys. See you next time.
See you next time.
I and MBT Events hope you like this video. If you do, then you should consider being a Patreon member, because Patreon members get early access to our special content. You will also be able to get your questions answered by me in special Q&A sessions, and most importantly, your contribution as a patron member will enable us to produce the content that you're looking for. So thank you.